Good morning and warm greetings, St Hilda's family and special guests. Thank you for the invitation to give an address on the wonderful occasion of celebrating 125 years of St Hilda's Anglican School for Girls. And for many years now, for boys in kindy and pre-primary too. My family have had members at your school for quite a number of those years, 4 generations. Starting from my beautiful and much-loved mother, Hope Nicholas, who the original school building was named after. And more recently, the Nicholas name is on your science building too. It was a huge privilege to attend St Hilda's when my mother and her younger sister Alex attended. This was during Depression years, and when Miss Parnell's at St Hilda's, was then called, opened its doors. 2/3 of its booked students couldn't attend, as their families couldn't afford to send them. Of course, back then, St Hilda's was surrounded by countryside, and my aunt said my outstanding grandfather, James Nicholas of Cobb & Co., sent his daughter Hope to school with her beloved pony to keep her company and a dairy cow, as her father wanted my mother to have fresh milk. There was no swimming pool at Miss Parnell's back then, and on weekends, my mother and other boarders particularly enjoyed going to the river, and the school arranged nice picnics for them by the riverside. Very happy school memories. My mother excelled at the piano, gaining a lifelong love of music, especially the piano. When it was time for me to board, as my father needed to be in the Pilbara 1,000 miles north, I boarded in grade 2 or 3, back in the early 60s. Our school was then called St Hilda's. My daughters followed, attending from either grade 1 or kindy. I loved to go home to our stations in the Pilbara. Like our friends further north, cyclones or the wet were very important parts of our year, as they had been since at least the 1860s, and weather was a big part of our conversations, rain being critical to our cattle. We learnt from first-hand experience that cyclones were never exactly the same. Some were more impactful with high-speed wind and rain, often dumped quickly, and of course the impacts were greater near the coast and where the cyclones crossed. Apart from these adverse and changing climate events, adverse for damage, changing as some years they had little impact, bringing too little much needed rain, or bringing flooding. There was another feature back then, pre the iron mining industry especially, when there were just us as pastoralists and a fishing village at Port Hedland. And although of critical importance to us, no TV crews rushed up to film the cyclones, or exaggerate them either. And like around the world as the population has increased, by billions since I was young, there are now more people, bigger cities in coastal areas, more coastal cities, and in the Pilbara, for instance, we now see a big important revenue-earning town at Port Hedland, plus new coastal area towns such as Dampier and Karratha. They are in a region subject to usually annual cyclones, where previously just sparsely populated stations existed, and the cyclones of varying intensity in this most climate-varying part of West Australia, our north, went pretty much unnoticed by media for more than 100 years, and hence by association by government. Apart from boarding school food, which frankly was truly awful back then, and gave me a lifetime of loving good food far too much, I'm grateful that I had a real education, not one based on propaganda, but facts and rationale. I continue to believe that facts and rationale should provide the basis for education. It concerns me greatly that the current generation of school leavers and attendees too often miss such important basics, as too often propaganda erodes these critical foundations. It's very important, in my view, that today's parents or guardians and grandparents ask their children each and every day what they are learning at school, counter any propaganda, and address their concerns with the teachers directly, and of course the principal. When my mother and I were at St Hilda's, it was known as the leading girls' private school in West Australia. I truly hope St Hilda's will always endeavour to be this, and strongly guard against propaganda intruding on real education and rational thinking. I'll give an example. I'd heard that senior school students in a previous headmistress's time were having to watch sometimes 4 times over for their various classes, even English Lit, the ex-Democrat Vice President Al Gore film titled An Inconvenient Truth. Catchy title, but sadly short on delivery as far as truth is concerned, e.g. the sad loss of polar bears, when actually their numbers have increased. But lots of emotional things like that to stir or frighten people, even a graph that looked like a hockey stick part going backwards. And despite the argument that human-induced climate change would cause the rising of oceans, as he propounded, using his global warming speech fees to buy a multi-million-dollar home shoreside in California. So I brought Lord Monckton and Professor Ian Plimer no speech fees to address senior students and hopefully take away some of the emotional fear that was being spread around by such film and speeches. The first thing Lord Monckton asked the senior students, being aware an inconvenient truth had been shown repeatedly to students, was to put their hands up if they believed that climate change was human-induced. About 70% or more of students put their hands up. Lord Monckton and Professor Plimer were only given a comparatively short time to speak, during which they asked students to ask questions and check facts carefully, and then, at the end of their speeches, the question human-induced climate change was re-asked, and the hands changed. About 30% put their hands up. If I may ask a question for students to ask their teachers and do their own independent research, and that is, which comes first, global warming or an increase in carbon? It should help to point to 4 independent facts, which all come to the same conclusion independently, including what has been found in the geological record of ice, and separately chemistry principles. We'll leave you all to find the others. Not so easy to find facts at times these days. Not helped when the government supports grants towards one side of the argument, making it less beneficial to consider the natural influences on our climate, distance from the sun as the Earth orbits, which we should know influences summers and winters, volcanoes, including the many that erupt under the ocean, and other scientific facts that I had the benefit of learning when I was at school. Indeed, importantly, as we are overwhelmed by media and propaganda today, that the Earth lived through many ice ages and global warmings, pre-man even being on this planet. Hence, that multi-global warming and ice ages were not caused by man. But if these 4 independent facts all support global warming comes first, not increases in carbon, rationale should ask, why does the media in general and those they influence now call for reducing carbon? More questions spring to mind. Please be very careful about information spread on emotional basis or tied to money or egos or power seekers, and always search and research for the facts, even if the tide is against you and it's not considered popular. Facts may not be popular, but that shouldn't mean they should be overlooked. I was recently asked to write a foreword to a book which is about great women, and there are many of these. Marie Curie, a scientist who used her intelligent mind to research, asking questions, checking facts, the tried and true scientific approach, and her efforts led to medicine that helped so many lives. Of course, women were part of great adventure too, Just think of Amelia Earhart flying in her little plane with primitive navigation equipment across the oceans. And of our own women pioneers, my goodness, those brave pioneers who helped to settle our outback, leaving behind city conveniences and helping to build the sheep and wool industry that supported Australia over decades, like our Pilbara and Australian mining industry do these days. I know something of the early Pilbara pioneers, as 3 members of the Hancock family, plus the husband of Emma Hancock Withnell, set off in their little wooden boat, Sea Ripple, sailing over 1,000 miles to reach Cossack, and then walking inland to find fresh water and founding a settlement later town of Roban. They arrived to nothing. No home, no electricity, no hospitals, no childcare, no roads, no phones, no restaurants, no shops, etc. And the voyage up had not been smooth sailing, losing more than half their supplies, possessions, and stock. But these brave and hard-working pioneers, with no government support, and for that matter, no government tape, built the first buildings and established and grew the pastoral industry in the northwest, an industry which still contributes to our state today. And their stone buildings, built without government regulation, still stand today. It's become politically incorrect to quote what's in their diaries, but if I could say something, their diaries not only recorded weather, but showed they worked hard every day, then took some rest each Sunday, the entertainment being several hours of reading the Bible together. Great women, our pioneers. They had to cope with real stress in their lives, with little or less medicine, no doctors, no hospital, at times having to nurse their dying children in their laps. And it doesn't stop there. In this state, we are home to the SAS, and despite some dangerous media endeavouring to undermine our finest, we are very fortunate to have such highly trained, dedicated people defending us. At times, as we all know, these men and women are sent by our government on dangerous missions overseas to help to protect freedoms elsewhere. And it's usually mainly men sent overseas, usually months at a time, leaving their wives behind, often with young children to look after. These women don't have it easy. At times, their husbands can't even be home to support childbirth. I also admire them. And West Australia is home to great Olympians who became such inspirations through their hard work. Most do not really know how hard they work. Dedication, focus, and self-discipline as they endeavour to represent our country to the best of their ability, with traits which are, in my view, important for us all if we wish to succeed in life. My time allocation doesn't permit me to continue with other Australian women who inspire, so I will finish with quotes from a leader I do greatly admire for her sense, bravery, leadership, duty to her country, and acting in its interests, even if not popular in some noisy quarters. And I hope these quotes resonate, as we sure need better leadership in our country. Quoting from former Prime Minister Baroness Margaret Thatcher, quote, "Look at a day when you are supremely satisfied at the end. It's not a day when you lounge around doing nothing. It's a day when you've had everything to do and you've done it." Next quote, "I always cheer up immensely if an attack is particularly wounding, because I think, well, if they attack one personally, it means they have not a single political argument left." And another, "You may have to fight a battle more than once to win it." And another quote from Margaret Thatcher, "If you just set out to be liked, you will be prepared to compromise on anything at any time and would achieve nothing." She also said, quote, standing in the middle of the road is very dangerous. You get knocked down by the traffic from both sides. And another quote, don't follow the crowd. Let the crowd follow you. And importantly too, quote, I am not a consensus politician. I am a conviction politician. And yet another important quote, the problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money. And let's never forget her quote, quote, socialists cry, power to the people, and raise the clenched fist as they say it. We all know what they really mean, power over people, power to the state. There are so many more, but I'll just give you two more. New quote, to those waiting with bated breath for that favourite media catchphrase, the U-turn, I have only one thing to say. U-turn if you want to. The lady's not for turning. End quote. And especially for the ladies and girls present, quote, if you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman. End quote.